Welcome to a special episode of 'Cause We're Nerds, the podcast that covers trends and new releases in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. I'm this week's host, Caleb, and with me is my co-host and cousin, Zach.
What's up?
Thanks for joining us on our current series, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, where we will be discussing each MCU movie in release order, all leading up to Marvel's Avengers Infinity War coming out this April. It's time to grab your backpack and refill your web shooters as we discuss Spider-Man Homecoming. After two previous versions, why do we get yet another reboot in the Spider-Man franchise? What are the events that led to Sony allowing Spider-Man into the MCU? And how does this version stack up against the previous ones? Find out the answers to these questions and much more on 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Spider-Man Homecoming. Alright, Zach, well today we're talking about Spider-Man Homecoming starring Tobey Garfield. Wait, that's not right.
that doesn't sound accurate.
Yeah, a little bit different. So we are in the MCU this time with Spider-Man, and you might have noticed our roles have switched for this podcast.
That's right. I am now your co-host. I've been demoted.
Yeah, I didn't like what you were doing, so I just bumped you down.
No, more like this is a Spider-tastic podcast. As Caleb, you know a lot about the Spider-Man comics, more so than my enormous brain.
Dude, Spider-Man's my guy. People out there, you don't, but I have, I don't know, maybe 1,300 comic books. 13 to 1,500 comic books. Probably 90 to 95% of those are Spider-Man books, and the rest of them he's in. So, Spider-Man's my guy. So I'm really excited to be on the flip side for this, and hopefully it goes well.
Well, Caleb, you are surrounded by Spider-Man stuff, but I have switched my Avengers drinking water glass to a Spider-Man water glass in honor of Spider-Man Homecoming.
Very, very nice, Zach. I actually took this opportunity to catch up on some of my comics. I've been getting in them for years, but I haven't read a lot of stuff recently because I've been so busy. So I kind of took a dive in and read some books, and it was good times.
I like it. Collector troubles. You can collect them all, but to find time to read them all is a different story.
Yeah, so this time we get Spider-Man Homecoming. And right off the bat, I feel like this title is exactly what's going on, is bringing Spider-Man home, because this time he's in the MCU.
It is. So, Caleb, we talked a little bit about this in the Civil War, how Spider-Man is owned by Sony, but is now being produced by Marvel. We touched a little bit on the agreement, but I have some specifics for you. Are you ready?
All right, give them to me.
So the agreement was finalized in February of 2015. What both sides get is different. So Sony has to finance the movie. They are in charge of distributing the movie. They have to market. So they're in charge of all the marketing that goes into it. And they also have the final creative control, which I thought was kind of interesting because I originally thought Marvel did, but Sony actually has the final say. On the other hand, Marvel gets to make Spider-Man, gets to make the movie. They also get to include Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. On the flip side, because of the deal, Sony told them that they have to include at least one Marvel superhero in that movie. So for Spider-Man Homecoming, we got Iron Man. In the next Spider-Man movie, we'll get another Marvel character that has to be in there. And finally, actually, as part of this deal, Marvel now has full control of merchandise rights. To gain control of all merchandise rights, Marvel had to basically fork over $175 million as well as $35 million each movie, instead of, they would usually just get 5% of the revenue from Sony making a Spider-Man movie. So that's kind of the breakdown of what Sony gets and what Marvel gets.
That's interesting because I was under the impression that while Sony still got, all the movie revenue, that Marvel gets all of the merchandising rights or revenue.
Oh, I see. It could have been previous to this deal. What I read was that they got 5% of the revenue on the movie.
On the movie itself.
Yeah,
okay.
So I don't know how much of merch they got, but I do know they now have full control of the merchandise. Not only the sales, but the rights as well.
Okay. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about in Civil War how I found out about this and how big of a deal that this was for Spider-Man to come home. But this is just, a year after Civil War, after his introduction?
Yeah, it's just a year, and here we have another movie. And Caleb, we talked about, could both sides technically step away from this deal at any moment? I found out, yes, they could. both studios have the right to terminate this deal at any time for any reason.
Well, let's hope Sony doesn't decide to do that, because Marvel and the MCU is fantastic, and I feel like they're the kind of company that could come back and be like, oh yeah, we got this figured out now, when Marvel's the ones making the movies.
Yeah, that could easily happen. So fingers crossed, let's keep making Spider-Man movies.
All right, so in the year between these films, this film was obviously in production, so why don't you give us some insight into that story?
Yeah, so Amy Pascal was the head of Sony at the time, and she worked closely with Kevin Feige to basically construct this new Spider-Man movie, and they decided to go with a reboot. They didn't want to go the path of The Amazing Spider-Man. Originally, Sony had planned to make another Amazing Spider-Man to work towards the Sinister Six, as you might know, Caleb, but instead they decided to go a different direction. And then in the midst of this is when Sony actually got hacked. I don't know if you remember that. And Amy Pascal had to actually step down as the head of Sony. So instead, she became one of the producers on the movie. So producing the movie, you have Amy, you have Kevin Feige, and then you have the Russo brothers that, in concordance with them, are kind of on board, but are going to hand it off to another director.
Okay, cool. And I know that from pretty early in this film, they wanted to shoot for like a high school John Hughes type movie.
They did. So originally with this film, Amy Pascal wanted a actually large budget action movie of $275 million.
Wow.
Kevin Feige stepped in, and was like, no. That's not how we make movies in Marvel. Kevin Feige lowered that to only $175 million, which is apparently Kevin Feige's way in making Marvel movies, is that he likes to make the first one fairly low budget. The second one, again, somewhat higher budget, and the third kind of going all out with maybe that original budget that Amy Pascal wanted, but for this first one, not at all.
And that makes sense, but I mean, even that amount of money is pretty high for Marvel's first movies, but it is Spider-Man.
It is Spider-Man, and like you stated, Caleb, when they were looking for directors, Feige and Pascal stated they wanted a movie as if it were directed by John Hughes. They wanted this high school feeling, such as, if you know John Hughes' Breakfast Club or Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which we get a nod to in Spider-Man Homecoming. And so on June 23rd, Marvel and Sony announced that John Watts would direct Spider-Man Homecoming. I don't know if you know his filmography, but he's not known for much.
Yeah, I don't know him. I know that the last guy that directed Spider-Man, Mark Webb, he was known for like one movie, 500 Days of Summer. And I feel like they kind of did that again here, but even he didn't have like a big movie people knew.
No, he had some TVs, some shorts. I think his only movie before Spider-Man was something called The Clown. So nothing really. So I was kind of impressed that, Marvel got him. And anyways, he not only was picked to direct here, he actually came on board early enough. And as he was on set for Civil War during the Spider-Man scenes.
Oh, that's interesting. Did he help kind of inform the character?
At this point, I don't know if he was like directing. I assume not. It was still the Russo brothers. I think he was more there to observe and give some direction to Tom Holland.
And it is kind of a big deal to hand off this franchise to him. I mean, I know Marvel does this with all of their films, but Spider-Man is the most popular hero in the world. This is not a Marvel versus DC thing. Objectively, if you look at merchandising sales, Spider-Man far outgrosses any other heroes, including Superman and Batman. You would actually have to have both Superman and Batman combined and then multiplied by 2 or 3 before you actually hit those same numbers.
Yeah, Spider-Man's a huge franchise, but they did something completely opposite with Spider-Man Homecoming. Instead of getting maybe an established actor or even making it a huge production, they scaled it down and they got a young actor. So the Russo brothers pushed heavily for a high school Peter Parker. That was kind of their thing, and Kevin Feige agreed. And so on April 2016, the whole cast was announced that it would include, Tony Stark, who would kind of be Peter Parker's mentor. And it was also revealed that the screenwriters, apparently when they sat down to start writing a script for Spider-Man Homecoming, they created a laundry list of all the elements that in the previous Spider-Man franchises, and then they tried to avoid all of those. So they avoided a old actor playing a kind of high school, college age kid. They avoided all the other villains. They avoided emo, hip thrusting Spider-Man. They avoided all of that stuff to make something completely new that audiences had never seen before.
Yeah, and you mentioned they avoided villains. Vulture was actually supposed to be the villain of Spider-Man 4, the movie that never got made that was supposed to be coming after Spider-Man 3, Tobey Maguire's film. And instead, that got rebooted into The Amazing Spider-Man. So they're kind of bringing some of those past ideas back around for this one.
So Caleb, I mentioned that Tony Stark was announced in this movie, and obviously he is in this movie. Do you remember the marketing for Spider-Man Homecoming?
I remember a lot of the posters that were fantastic.
So I'm specifically talking about the fact that in all the trailers, they had Iron Man, which I thought was a great marketing scheme by Sony and Marvel to pull people who might not necessarily want to go see Spider-Man because it is a third reboot. But now because it has, hey, I know Iron Man, he's an Avenger, maybe I will go see it. And interestingly enough, there is a scene in the trailer where we see Iron Man and Spider-Man swing/fly through the city that never appears in the movie, never appears in a deleted scene, because that was all CGI and all made specifically just for marketing.
Yes, and that's not the only scene. You might remember the scene in the trailers where Vulture kind of comes down from this tall building and there's a really low angle shot of him. That was also made specifically for the trailer to kind of introduce him. They do use a lot of very similar camera angles and stuff for when he does show up in the film, but they did that a lot with this film because specifically, people didn't want another Spider-Man film. They were burned by Spider-Man 3. They were burned by the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, and I remember everyone talking to, I was like, oh, Spider-Man's going to be in the new movie, and they were like, ew, I don't want a new Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, all I heard leading up to this movie was people asking, why are we getting another reboot in 10 years, 12 years?
Yeah, it's like 15 or 16 year gap, but that's still insane to have 3 different franchises with the same character in that amount of time. The only other one I can think of that's anywhere close to that would be like the Hulk that they rebooted, and they went through 3 different actors in that amount of time. But even like James Bond, except for the Daniel Craig ones, that's a continuous kind of continuity. So I don't think there's anything to compare it to.
That's right. So, I mean, the marketing for this movie was great, other than the fact that most of the trailers ruined the entire movie because they gave away the entire plot.
Yeah, more or less. But, so you mentioned some new cast members, Zach. Just to name a few of them, we've got Tom Holland, obviously, as Peter Parker, and Marissa Tomei as May Parker, which we saw both of those in Civil War. But we have Michael Keaton here as Adrian Toomes / the Vulture.
That's right. Previously Batman, now playing in Marvel.
Yeah, this guy's a great actor, and obviously best known for Batman 89, but countless other things. We also have Michael Chernis as Phineas Mason, Zendaya as Michelle Jones. Were you familiar with her?
You know, I knew she was from the Disney Channel. That's about it.
Yeah, I have a younger sister that watched the Disney Channel show she was in.
Shake It Up, I think?
Yeah, Shake It Up. I personally wasn't a fan, but it wasn't meant for me. We also get Jacob Batalon as Ned Leeds, ? They actually don't ever state his name in this film. Laura Harrier as Liz Allen, and a whole lot of other people that we'll talk about once we get to them, because this movie is stuffed with characters, and almost all of them are in some way from the comics.
Now, Caleb, in our Civil War podcast, we said that we would talk about Tom Holland in our Spider-Man podcast. So, do you know who else was up for the running of Peter Parker?
I know there was a whole lot of people. I know the kid from The Lightning Thief was up for this at one point. A lot of young actors.
There was. I mean, Marvel specifically looked at a whole list of young actors. 2 of them, Logan Lerman from Percy Jackson and Dylan O'Brien from The Maze Runner. And Tom Holland and all these other actors had to go through very interesting kind of steps to, get this part. They actually first had to test screen with Robert Downey Jr.
Yes, and before they even did that, they got 7,500 audition tapes for this thing, and they met with 200 people.
And each person not only had to test with Robert Downey Jr., but they also had to test in front of Kevin Feige, Amy Pascal, the Russo brothers, as well as the director.
They also did a screen test with Chris Evans to make sure that they were charismatic with both Downey and Evans.
Exactly. What I thought was interesting is I found an interview with Tom Holland from 2013, and in the interview, somebody asks basically Tom Holland, would you ever like to play somebody like a superhero? And he states, yeah, like Spider-Man would be a cool superhero in maybe 10 years or so when they do a reboot of the reboot.
Yeah, that's really funny. He talked about that in some of the behind-the-scenes interviews. and how much it means to him to get this role. And actually, I think that Chris Hemsworth, Thor, helped him get this role because they were in a film together, and he kind of pulled for him to get cast as Spider-Man. So it's nice to see all the actors working together.
It really is. And unfortunately, we don't get some other actors that were potential casting actually here. The first of those, Nick Fury.
That's right. He just wasn't needed in this movie.
So originally in the script, he was actually going to be the mentor of Spider-Man, but they decided that wouldn't make sense. And, Nick Fury as a mentor would be kind of odd.
Well, you say that, but that's actually the plot of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon.
Oh, well, there you go. The other potential casting that we had was J.K. Simmons, back for J. Jonah Jameson. So he stated that he was really interested. I think Marvel did approach him and started to talk to him and kind of feel it out. And then he kind of betrayed Marvel and went to DC. So that kind of cut ties. That stopped that right away.
Yeah, but there's no Daily Bugle here either, so I'm not sure how that would have worked.
Yeah, I think this was really early on in the process.
Well, Zach, with that out of the way, you want to get into the movie?
Let's do it. Thrilled by his experience with the Avengers, young Peter Parker returns home to live with his Aunt May. Under the watchful eye of mentor Tony Stark, Parker starts to embrace his newfound identity as Spider-Man. He also tries to return to his normal daily routine, distracted by thoughts of proving himself to be more than just a friendly neighborhood superhero. Peter must soon put his powers to the test when the evil Vulture emerges to threaten everything that he holds dear.
All right. Well, this movie opens up right after the Battle of New York when they're trying to clean everything up. And this is actually really interesting, Zach, the fact that we start here and with the villain instead of the hero.
Adrian Toomes, the Vulture.
As I mentioned before, he was originally set to appear in Spider-Man 4, actually played by John Malkovich of all people, but we get him here. He first appeared in the comics in Amazing Spider-Man number 2, so very, very early. He's only the second villain to appear. Now, in the comics, though, he's kind of an old man. Here, he's a middle-aged man. The old guy wasn't that scary.
And in the comics, he just has a winged suit, right?
Yeah, so basically, he builds this flight harness and puts it in this weird green bird suit thing. He's got like
nice.
this fluffy white collar, which they actually bring into this film, which looks really good. But yeah, so he's a bit different. He's an electrical engineer that was backstabbed, and he ends up building this flight harness and gets some of his money back. And long story short, he ends up liking everything he did, so he stays kind of a criminal. The powers that he gets are really only from this suit. Obviously, he can fly. He gets some enhanced strength, which I think they bring into this film. And also, he's really smart. I mean, he built it himself in the comics, so...
Well, not only do we have the Vulture from the comics, but we also have an appearance from Damage Control. So while Adrian is trying to clean up the Leviathan, Damage Control comes in and takes it away from them.
That's right, and Damage Control is something that's been around in the comics for quite a while, first appearing in 1998 in Marvel Age Annual number 4, and they are led here by a character called Anne-Marie Hogue. I don't think she's ever named in the film, but that is her name. She is from the comics as well. She's actually the owner of the company. In the comics, the company was founded by Tony Stark and Wilson Fisk, which is the Kingpin, and then she kind of took it over from there. In this film version, Tony Stark does play a role in founding it. It is a joint operation between him and the government, and so that's why they're coming in and kind of deciding that these other people aren't going to clean it up, they're going to clean it up. And another thing that's interesting, Zach, is Marvel was considering a Damage Control sitcom for a while.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I think that started talking about that in like 2015, and nothing came of it, and so they kind of just folded them in here.
Which I think works. Nobody needs a Damage Control sitcom.
I don't know. I personally liked Powerless, so I would have been up for it. But really, this is just to serve as a backstory for Adrian Toomes, as we're then whisked away to 8 years later?
That's right. I was trying to piece this together, but does it fit together?
All right, so this completely breaks the MCU timeline.
It really does, because Spider-Man is not 8 years later after the Avengers.
The issue is, for the most part, Spider-Man, the MCU, avoids specific dates. They kind of go for vague kind of areas, and most of the movies take place in the year they come out, with a few exceptions. Iron Man is seen to have revealed himself in 2008. That's supposed to be solid confirmed, right?
Yeah.
In Civil War, Vision says it's been 8 years since he did that, So that would put that in 2016, which is the year it came out. This is set 2 months after that, which we'll see in a little bit. So this should still be in 2016, 2017, but it still doesn't make sense. This 8 years later kind of breaks the whole thing. Nobody knows why they did it either.
No. It doesn't really make sense at all.
As we get here, we do get a shot of basically Tomb's new operation. He has become a villain, and he flies in here in his Vulture suit. Now, what did you think of the design of his suit here, Zach?
I loved it. I mean, you can't just put some old man missing hair into a green feather suit and call it good. Yeah, I actually really liked his suit. I thought it was great how they integrated the technology in here. And I also thought it was very interesting that they put another villain in this scene as well. What did you think of the suit as well as the other villain?
Well, Zach, to be honest, the Vulture has never been one of my favorite characters. I've always found him kind of laughable and lame, but what they did with him here is fantastic. He looks terrifying. He looks intimidating, and it all makes sense. In terms of this other character, are you talking about the Tinkerer?
I am.
All right, guys. So this guy was present in that first shot back in New York, and he's the one that's building everything. In the comics, this guy's name is Phineas Mason, which I think they might actually refer to him here. But he is known in the villain community as the Tinkerer. Basically, he's the guy that will build you your supervillain technology if you don't know how to do it.
Yeah, pretty much. If you don't have the smarts, he'll do it for you.
Yeah, so he's incredibly smart. He's built a whole lot of things. He built Mysterio's suit, rocket racers, skateboard, and big wheel, if you know what those things are. But also in the comics, he's sort of an old man, old and frail, and they age him down here.
Caleb, did he first appear in a Spider-Man comic?
He actually did. He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man #2 as well, with the Vulture in 1963. So he is one of the earliest villains.
And so after this introduction of the villains, we jump into our Marvel logo, but this time it is scored very differently. We have an orchestral version of the 1960s Spider-Man theme. And instead of telling you about it, here's a short clip from it. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. That was really bad. Do it quicker. Spins a web. Spider-Man.
No, Zach, I absolutely love this touch. This is like, for me as a Spider-Man fan, this is like walking the Death Star for Star Wars fans. This is it. I love this. In fact, I wish they would have used this in the film. But anyway, we get a student film by Peter Parker right after this, which serves basically as a update to catch you up what happened in Civil War if you weren't around to see it.
Yeah, Happy Hogan is back. We get a brief description from Tony Stark that while he is a bodyguard, he now wants to try to be the new asset manager for the Avengers. Which
plays into the end of this film. But yeah, this is sort of a retcon of what happened in Civil War. The relationship with Peter and Happy. And, I wasn't expecting him to be in this film at all, and he's in it a lot, and I really like him here.
Yeah, and Caleb, not only did they retcon some of the relationship stuff, kind of that whole end scene after Civil War doesn't really make much sense because we never see that homecoming icon beacon at all again in this movie, as well as the fact that at the end of Civil War, he is icing his face because he got hit, and he had to explain to Aunt May that he was beat up by Steve from Brooklyn. In this scene, he is in the limo, and Tony is scraped up, but Peter Parker does not have a scratch on him.
Yeah, and I mentioned this back in Civil War, how that scene doesn't really make sense. They were just trying to tease his movie, but you're right. But what I really like about this opening scene, Zach, is this kid is a teen. Like, he is not Tobey Maguire, 25-year-old, acting like he's in high school. He acts like the teens today. I have a brother that just came out of high school. This is how they act.
That's very true. I mean, and I thought it was very accurate with how joyous he was and just teeny awkward about this new suit that he gets, the Spider-Man suit.
Yeah, we actually get the origin of where it came from here. In Civil War, we just know it came from Tony. But yeah, it's this new suit that he wears for the majority of this film. Tony gives it to him, and he's ecstatic. And obviously, he puts it on, he gets to keep it. But another thing about this opening that I find really awesome is, I mentioned there's no Daily Bugle here. There's no photography here, but we do get a lot of these videos that Peter makes, and it's mentioned that he's on YouTube and stuff, which kind of harkens back to that photography background.
Yeah, so they scraped it because that was part of the laundry list. I'm sure it might come back again, but it is still here in some sense in the movie. Now, Caleb, for a little tidbit of information that you might not want to know about Tom Holland, is he said that Spider-Man suit was so tight that he had to wear a thong underneath the suit.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. There's actually other heroes. I don't think MCU heroes, but other people that have just go naked underneath their suits.
Now, I could believe it, but I don't want to put this suit on the next day after filming for like 8 hours in the hot sun.
Yeah, they probably have guys to clean that.
I'm sure. So this high school kid then gets whisked away to Midtown School of Science and Technology High School.
That's right. So this school is a little bit different than it is in the comics and most other media. In most things, it's just called Midtown High School. Here, it's kind of some preparatory school or something that's specifically geared towards science and technology, which is an interesting change. It kind of explains why some of these characters are so smart, though, so that's cool.
And it's here that we are introduced to a whole slew of characters, some that have kind of major roles and others that have minor roles, but have definitely major roles in the comics. The first of those we see on a TV report in the school, Betty Brant and Jason Lonello.
I think it's Ionello, but maybe it's Lonello. Betty Brant, she was featured in the very first Spider-Man trilogy. She was kind of the secretary in the Daily Bugle. Here, she just appears on the TV, along with Jason. They don't really do much. But in the comics, she first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 4, also in 1963. She is the secretary in the comics, although she has gone on to become a reporter in her own right. And she has had a relationship with Peter Parker, so she's pretty important in the history of him. In terms of Jason, he's not that important. He didn't appear until 1995 in Untold Tales of Spider-Man number 1. And he's kind of retconned into Spider-Man's past, where he is a bully that hangs around with Flash at high school and bullies Peter. So, like I said, not that important.
That's right. It's cool those two make kind of a cameo. But we are quickly introduced to Peter Parker's best friend, Ned Leeds, ? I do believe this is Ned Leeds, but go ahead.
Yeah, so in some interviews and stuff, he's been referred to as Ned Leeds. He's never referred to that in the film, and also in the credits, he's only credited as Ned. But for sake of argument, he's Ned Leeds, which is a character from the comics. He's a reporter at the Daily Bugle, and he has some other storylines that happen. But really, this isn't who this character is, Zach. They just stole that name. Really, who this is Gank, a character from the Ultimate line of comic books, who first appeared in Ultimate Comics Spider-Man number 2, Volume 2, for those of you keeping track. In this universe, Peter Parker died, and another Spider-Man called Miles Morales comes up and takes the mantle, and this is his best friend. And he was pretty influential in that story. He kind of pushes Miles into becoming Spider-Man and filling that role. He also learns his identity very quickly, in a very similar manner to how it happens in this film. And it's funny, in the comics, they actually reference the name Ned after this movie came out. In Spider-Man Volume 2, number 16, he's using the name Ned undercover, and someone's like, he doesn't look like a Ned. But yeah, he looks just like the comic book version of Gank, and I don't know why they didn't call him Gank.
And so they hang out at school, and as creepy high schoolers do, they're just staring at Liz, who at this point is a senior, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's what they state. And this is Liz Allen? Liz Toombs? Again, they don't call it out in this film, and it's not in the credits. I'm going to assume Toombs.
Is there a huge difference?
In the comics, she's Liz Allen, but because of her parentage in this film, I think it's Toombs. But in the comics, Liz, again, is a pretty big part of Spider-Man lore. She debuted in Amazing Fantasy number 15, which is actually the comic that Spider-Man first debuted in. She's also the girlfriend of Flash in the comics for quite a time. She initially picked on Peter as well, and she is Peter's first love.
Well, that would make sense then, and why to include her in Spider-Man Homecoming. Talking about Flash, we also see Flash briefly here making fun of Peter Parker as well as Ned.
Yeah, out of all of these people, Flash is probably the biggest character in the school from the comics. Again, he first appeared in Amazing Fantasy 15, and he was physically abused by his dad in the comics, which led him to abuse Peter, bully him. Ultimately, as an adult, he joined the army and lost both his legs. He dated Betty for a while, but because he lost his legs and his connections to the army, he ends up becoming Agent Venom, which you might be familiar with, Zach. Where they kind of turned the Venom symbiote into a hero, an anti-hero. And then later, through a whole bunch of crazy things, he turns into Agent Anti-Venom.
Oh, for a second there, I thought you were going to say he appears in Forrest Gump.
Yeah, not Lieutenant Dan.
And Caleb, this is one character out of the list of characters we just mentioned that actually has appeared in each of these iterations of Spider-Man throughout the years.
That's right. So in the first movie, he was played by the new Deathstroke in the DC universe. And the second series is played by some guy I don't know, but he's such a big part, I don't know how you could leave him out.
Now we also have Michelle Jones, who is a very kind of strange and odd character, but always gave me some chuckles throughout this movie.
Yeah, she is not from the comics. She's an original character. She has a twist later on that we'll cover that, but she's not very important for most of the movie.
That's right. What I will say is in each appearance she is reading a book or makes a reference to a book that's connected to Spider-Man or to a spider. So for example, the first time we see her, she is reading a 1915 novel on human bondage, which is a book about an orphan living with his aunt and uncle.
Oh, very interesting.
Another book she reads later on is about a prisoner whose only friend is a spider. So very interesting connections here.
But we're also introduced to Mr. Harrington, the decathlon teacher here at the school. This guy, I think, is funny. He's great. He's in the show Silicon Valley, if you watch that. And so I was really excited to see him here. And I think he's just as funny in this film.
That's right. But more importantly, we have seen him before because he was in the Hulk movie back in 2008.
That's right. When they go into the university for the first time, he's the dude holding pizza, kind of doing a fist pump. Yeah,
that's right. When Bruce Banner basically breaks into the university to try to get his files back on the university laptops, which, again, no reason those files should be on the laptops, and he gives them pizza to buy him off. He is that same guy. So I guess in the MCU, he graduated college and is now teaching at Midtown High.
Yeah, well, that's pretty cool. Last character we get here for a while is Abraham Brown. He is one of the students on the decathlon team. In the comics, he appeared in Deadly Hands of Kung Fu #1 in 1974, so not at all related. He's a martial artist, obviously, with no powers. He is the brother of Hobie Brown, though, the Prowler, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but he doesn't have anything to do with that version of the character in this film.
And he is played by Abraham Atta, if you are familiar from the Netflix show Beasts of No Nation that came out a few years ago.
But now that we're past that cavalcade of characters,
yes,
we get into some other cool things. Now, we see Peter here in the school. He's making web fluid, which is fantastic because he didn't have that at all in the first trilogy. In Amazing Spider-Man, he got it, but he didn't make it. Here, he's making it. And this does something correct that the other trilogies got wrong, or the other series got wrong. He is smart. He is so incredibly smart. He does decathlon. He was in band. He was doing robotics lab. He's making his own webs. This is the Peter from the comics.
That's right. And Caleb, you just included band with intelligence. I'm going to edit that out.
Hey.
That's right. But not only do we get that, we also actually see a slew of other MCU characters at this school. Not in person, but in pictures. So the first person we see is Bruce Banner, who's in a picture in Peter's science class. We also, through the school's hallways, get to see Dr. Abraham Erskine from Captain America, as well as Howard Stark.
That's right, which is cool because these people were pretty big players in the history of the MCU. And so this kind of whole scene just serves to introduce us to the school and all these many characters. But after school's over, Peter is ready to go out and swing around town. And we see him go into an alleyway, changing a costume. Again, just like the comics, Peter does stuff like this all the time. In fact, he webs his backpack to the wall there. He does that in the comics a lot. And also, again, loses it when he comes back.
He actually loses it because it is webbed to the trash can, the dumpster, which is taken away.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's a great nod to the comics.
And they also have a classic Marvel man with his shirt off scene here.
Oh, in his underwear, not just his shirt off. But Zach, I do have a question about this costume. The way he puts it on is amazing and really cool. But I've always wondered, like, what happens if he's in the middle of a battle and the villain just, like, taps his chest? Does it just, like, fall off?
That's right. To defeat Spider-Man, all you have to do is give him a little boop, and that's it. No, I could imagine that Tony Stark has probably made it where it is only activated through his DNA or some type of function where Peter Parker has to himself be touching it through identification. I'm sure Tony Stark has a failsafe for that.
That's a good point. But he does go off here and kind of have his hero montage where a whole bunch of stuff happens.
That's right. And Caleb, can I just say that I appreciate that Spider-Man Homecoming skipped his origin story. There's references to it, but they don't mention it, or they don't show it. We don't spend an hour on it, which is amazing.
Right, and that's one of the things that was on their checklist initially that they really wanted to do because we've seen it twice now. We know.
That's right. And in this hero montage, we have some cool scenes, including a shot at the Amazing Spider-Man as this Spider-Man, Tom Holland, starts standing up behind an American flag, which is kind of an iconic shot from the Amazing Spider-Man, but was also an iconic shot from the other Spider-Man too. So both franchises. And then he kind of does a backflip. So, it's turned more into a humorous scene versus like a memento.
Like you said, I think they do that in each one of the original 3 movies. There's not a whole lot going on here of note, except that we're getting introduced to Spider-Man, and I am loving what I see. He's quippy and funny like he is in the comics. He leaves notes when he's done, which he does in the comics all the time. He signs it Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which we get a call out later in this film. But most importantly, he makes mistakes. He's not perfect. He's not Iron Man or Captain America who gets everything right every time. And that goes a long way in making him relatable.
That's right. He doesn't have a lot to do. He shows a grandma what's up. He stops somebody from trying to get their car unlocked that's theirs, which is where we see our Stan Lee cameo, who starts yelling at Spider-Man. And Caleb, this was actually one of the cameos that Stan Lee filmed in that 1-day period. He filmed 4 of them, and this was one of them, including the one we'll see next in Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah, and it's a really great one. But as this is going on, he ends up at a bank robbery and he tries to stop it. But he's not really sure what to do.
That's right. So he sees the Avengers, and this is actually from the comics. This is from the Ultimate Spider-Man issue 42. Caleb, I love how Spider-Man Homecoming ties in the Avengers. We get the masks here. We got the picture at the start we didn't really talk about. There's references all throughout the film, even in the high school where they're playing the F, Marry, Kill game, and they just tie in the Avengers there. Iron Man's in it, Captain America's in it. I love how ingrained the Avengers are into the society because, they should be.
Yeah, and it's done in a way that feels real and it feels genuine. It's not like they're just throwing references everywhere. And in fact, this entire film is based on the aftermath of their battle. So it does make sense. And I love the way they handle it. I think that this feels just like they do in the comics where they can bring other characters in and it not be weird.
And we get a brief glimpse of Thor Ragnarok as he has Thor punch Hulk. Yes, a little foreshadowing.
But he does ultimately stop them and accidentally blow up Delmar's Deli, which is a deli we saw a little bit earlier in the film. He feels really bad about. And this is kind of his first big mistake, I think.
Yeah, it really is, and he feels terrible about it, and the thieves, are able to escape. He is left with a destroyed building, but he does save Delmer and his cat.
So after this, he kind of goes back to the alleyway to pick some stuff up, but on his way, he calls Happy Hogan.
That's right. Happy Hogan is at the Avengers Tower, so we actually get to see it, and it is being sold, and he's actually trying to now allocate all those assets, so I guess he did get the job. Now, Caleb, it has been speculated that if the Fox Marvel deal does go through, this would be the perfect introduction of the Fantastic Four. As a Fantastic Four fanboy, and you probably know this from reading the comics, is that in the comic world, they have the Baxter Building. So the Fantastic Four have the Baxter Building in New York, and so they could definitely introduce them, even if this is 4 years from when they introduce them. They could have easily said, Reed Richards buys this building and introduce the Fantastic Four this way. Just a little tidbit to keep in your minds 4 years from now.
Yeah, I actually think that would be really interesting. Just take out the A and put a 4 on there.
Exactly.
But Peter does go back to that alley and finds his backpack gone. And so he decides to go back home. And he comes inside and he's really sneaky, trying to make sure Aunt May doesn't see him. And he crawls down and he turns around and Ned is right there. He saw the whole thing.
That's right. And I cringe at this scene because he drops the Lego Death Star. That's so many pieces. I know how long that takes to build. It's just like, oh, come on.
So actually, at work, there's a guy that got that for Christmas and built it, but he didn't want to keep it. Like, he just wanted to build it. And so it sat in our office for like a year and a half. And that thing is massive. There's so many pieces.
Ned finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, which I don't know about you, Caleb, because I know his identity and keeping that secret is huge in the comics as well as the other franchises in the movies. But what did you think the fact that they did this pretty early on? I believe it's only been like about 20, 25 minutes into the movie, if that.
Yeah, I like this. I think it's natural. I think it feels good. It allows him to talk to people about what's going on. I don't know if I feel the same way about some other developments in the film, but here it's great. And they have great banter as well.
They really do, including Aunt May, who whisks Peter away to a Thai restaurant. Now, as we zoom in on that scene to the Thai restaurant, Caleb, if you read, it's in Korean, there's signage on a building right next to that restaurant, and it says the Holy Korean Church of Asgard, or like the Korean Church of Worshipping Asgard, which is kind of an interesting tie-in that there are already religions that are worshipping Asgard in the MCU.
That's weird, but also makes sense, so I'm strangely okay with that.
Yeah, exactly.
But, this is Aunt May. I don't think we really need to introduce her. Everybody knows who she is.
Hot Aunt May.
Yeah, hot Aunt May. But you know what? She's also actually really cool in this film. She's young, she's hip, at risk of me sounding old.
No.
But, I kind of think that she's where Peter gets his humor from, because she's really funny in this film.
She really is, and I love their relationship. I think it works really well.
Yeah, so they kind of talk here, and it's not that important, except that Peter needs a new backpack. That's the 5th one he's lost.
She has to get suspicious. Like, she is definitely getting suspicious at this point.
Oh, yeah, like, hands down.
And so the next day, Peter and Ned are at school, and Ned continues to ask him all of the questions that one would ask if you find out that your friend is Spider-Man.
Yeah, it talks about his origin, how that happened. We hear a little about it, but most importantly, he asks if Peter can lay eggs, spit venom, and command an army of spiders. All of these things have happened at some point in the comics. The army of spiders was a part of Superior Spider-Man. The venom thing could be a reference to Venom. Some of these are alternate versions, but they've all been there.
That's right, and again, they throw shade at a Spider-Man movie. I love how this movie throws shades at the other franchises when Ned states, well, how far can you shoot webs? Because I would stand on the edge of a building and shoot as far as I could, which is what Peter Parker does in the original Spider-Man movie, the first one that came out.
Well, they do finally make their way to school, and they're in gym class, and they get this workout video, health video, from Captain America.
That's right. We also see Coach Wilson here, played by Hannibal Buress. I know him from the Eric Andre show. If you've never seen that, I would highly suggest that show. Just be prepared.
I know him from a show called Broad City. I don't know if I want to say that.
You shouldn't.
It's a comedy. It's from Comedy Central.
And they reference that Cap is now a fugitive, but whatever.
Yeah, which actually plays into the principal of this school, who has some ties to Captain America, so I think that might be why they're still playing it. But we also get some shots of Flash here, and he's a psychological bully in this film. He's not your typical old school, like, gonna beat you up villain. He says mean things, and that's what bullies do these days.
Yeah, so Watts actually stated that he didn't want your typical Flash Thompson like the other movies. He wanted to bully him nowadays, which is someone who's more psychological. They're gonna be, shouting slurs, names, getting you where it hurts. However, Caleb, I don't think Flash Thompson necessarily does work out. I think he definitely works in that he's psychological, but I still think that in the real world, this kid wouldn't necessarily be a bully. He needs to be a little more preppy, a little more out there for that.
Yeah, he's just a jerk, really.
Yeah, he really is. When I say pickle, you say Parker. Pickle.
Parker.
Pickle.
Parker. This
is a family-friendly podcast. I am not going to use the other term that Flash used, because Peter Parker and Ned are invited to Liz's house for a party after Ned spills the beans that Peter knows Spider-Man, and so they pull up. Well, Aunt May's actually driving, so they just get dropped off because they're in high school, and Flash Thompson is definitely seeing something to that effect.
Yeah, and this whole scene for me, it doesn't really work very well. It doesn't need to be here. It feels like it's slowing the movie down. There's some drama about whether Peter should show up as Spider-Man or not. It doesn't really matter, I don't think. What does matter is that he goes up on the roof and he sees this explosion and he goes to see what it is.
That's right. To find it is an arms deal between some of the Vulture's minions and, well, somebody else. But all of the people here are fairly significant.
That's right. So they're trying to sell some kind of weapons that are from the other movies here. A slave Ultron arm, some black hole grenades, some Chitauri tech, all to this guy that Donald Glover is playing, Aaron Davis, who we'll talk about in a bit more detail later. But both these other guys that are working for Vulture are Shocker. Are you familiar with Shocker, Zach?
Yes. His yellow jumpsuit-looking attire with a vest.
Yeah, so in the comics, this is a guy named Herman Schultz. Here he's played by Bokeem Woodbine, who first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 46. He's pretty much a career criminal, has done this all his life. When he was in prison, he built these gauntlets that we see him use throughout this movie. And these aren't electronic gauntlets, like they don't fire electricity. They're more like concussive blasts. I don't think they really follow through with that in this film, because I see lightning bolts at some points. But he also wears this very campy yellow padded suit, quilted suit, to protect himself from those concussive blasts. Here they've changed it to just his arms. We see it on his arms. But he's also been a part of the Sinister Six. The other guy here is a different version of the Shocker from the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show cartoon that was on for a while. In the comics, this guy's name is Jackson Bryce. He's a different character known as Montana, who's a member of the Enforcers, who's kind of this low-level group of 3 guys that people can hire. He's not very smart or very threatening, but he first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 10, so also pretty early. And he's only showed up as the Shocker in that TV show. Otherwise, he's Montana. But here, it's called out that their gauntlets came from the Crossbones battle at the beginning of Civil War. They're a modified version of that, so that's why they actually look different.
Now, Caleb, is it called out specifically in the movie? Because I saw an article stating that, but I never saw that called out in the movie.
Yeah, I said it's called out here. It's actually not here. It's called out a little bit later. It's in the background, though. You hear them talking. I think it's when Peter's sneaking up on them in the van. He said that they got it from the Lagos event. So it's called out there, that's where it came from, and they look like those gauntlets. So that's how you make the connection. Spidey does kind of fight them here, and he ends up having to chase them. We get a fun reference to Ferris Bueller's Day Off as he's running through the backyard.
Caleb, when watching this, I wrote down in my notes, this reminds me of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. They really did get this feeling down. And then here comes Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that was in the movie. This definitely feels like a John Hughes film.
Yeah, and I think that it works really, really well. It's a hard thing to pull off. And as Spider-Man's chasing them, the Vulture attacks him. And this is where we get that shot that's kind of low angle. He comes from above. It's very frightening, actually. Vulture takes him way high up in the air and just drops him. And Spider-Man would have died.
That's right, if not for the fact that A, he has an amazing suit by Tony, and B, Tony actually had to save him in the Iron Man suit. And so here the Iron Man suit swoops down, saves him from the water, and kind of gives him a little talking to.
That's right, and we get a pretty good shot of the suit here. This is a new suit for Iron Man. I actually not sure what mark it is, but this is inspired by the Ultimate version in the comics, the Ultimate Comics version of his suit, where it's got kind of the silver and the red, and there's a little bit of gold. I don't know if there's gold in the movie version, though.
Are we on mark 52?
I don't know, Zach. I didn't write it down.
What was our last mark?
It was like 46 or 7.
So this is 48. Mark 48.
Sure. But this is actually also a good point to mention, Zach, that this is not the first time Tony and Peter have come into contact.
It apparently is not. So back in Iron Man 2, you might remember that at the Stark Expo, when Rhodey's systems were hacked and he was attacking Iron Man, and all the other Iron Guards were hacked and destroying people, that there was a kid in an Iron Man mask who tried to blast one of the enemies, and Iron Man blasted the enemy for him and saved the kid. That was Peter Parker.
Yes, confirmed by Kevin Feige himself.
Yeah, so actually originally why we didn't talk about it in Iron Man 2 is this is a new development that happened because of Spider-Man Homecoming. Basically, it was really simple. Tom Holland watched the film, went up to Kevin Feige, said, "Hey, I think that's my character." And Kevin Feige said, "Sure, why not?" And they made it canon. That's literally how it happened. Really easy. his face is hidden, so who cares?
Exactly. It's a cool Easter egg, but it doesn't make any difference.
No, it doesn't. Another cool Easter egg here is that Iron Man calls Spider-Man a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
That's right, as I mentioned, straight from the comics. And it's also hinted that Peter has technology in his suit here, but it's not quite fleshed out yet. But he does find a Chitauri power core, and he takes it with him back home. However, as he's doing that, we jump to Toomes' base of operations. One of the Shockers, Herman Schultz, the first one, wants to leave, but he doesn't like that too much, and he just kills him. Accidentally.
Yeah, that's right. So the Vulture kills him, doesn't mean to, but does foreshadow the fact that he has to protect his family, the big turn that we will get near the end of the movie. And so back to the high school, Midtown, we see that a couple of the crew have gone to find the gun that Peter Parker retrieved, and Peter is able to shoot a tracer onto them and follow them all the way to Maryland. And so Peter Parker decides to use the decathlon that he earlier had said he wasn't going to attend so that he could get to Washington, D.C. and get closer to Maryland.
So he does that, and we show back up in D.C. Now, Zach, I'm not sure if you're aware, most of this film is filmed in Atlanta, actually. A lot of Marvel films are now. And I actually do live in the Atlanta area, and my brother made it into this film.
Now, Caleb, I have looked to see if I could see our cousin in the movie, and I have not found him. But apparently you can see him here in DC.
Yeah, it's a very blink and you miss it shot. It's when they're in the hotel. He actually walks behind Tom. He was present for the whole filming of the Washington Monument scene, and he thought he was actually going to make it in a few shots there. It didn't happen. But yeah, he was on set as an extra for about a week for this movie. So I thought that was really cool. He actually got to talk to Zendaya and Tom Holland.
That's right. He peed next to Tom Holland. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
We still need DNA proof, so.
It was a very awkward affair that we're not going to go into here.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to the movie. Peter basically hacks the suit because he finds out there's a tracker in it. He removes the tracker because he doesn't want Tony following him. At the same time, Ned deactivates the training wheels protocol, which basically reveals this whole AI that's in Peter's suit.
That's right. And he turns on instant kill mode.
Yes. Now, this looks exactly like the superior Spider-Man version of the suit, with the black eyes.
It's also revealed that he has 576 web shooter combos.
Which is kind of a nice way to explain how he can do all these different web things, because in the comics he just does it, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it.
So he's tracked the thugs to a lone stretch of road in Maryland, an abandoned gas station. And it sounds like they're talking about the Triskelion and that there's still cleanup happening.
Yeah, this actually called out again when they're on their way to DC. There's actually a deleted scene where you see the Triskelion over off to the side and they're still cleaning it up. So yeah, that's a thing.
Does that still fit into the continuity? Because it should have been several years by now. I feel like they should have cleaned that up.
Well, think about it. I mean, when the Twin Towers came down, it took them years to clean that up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's been a couple years.
It's been 2 years or so. I could totally see how that would take a long time to clean up. They probably had nuclear reactors and stuff in there too. I mean, there's no telling. It was a SHIELD headquarters.
That's very true.
As Peter is kind of trying to stop them, he does get into a little scuffle with the Vulture, and he gets trapped in this 18-wheeler truck, which then pulls into a facility that we find out is damage control, and he gets trapped in there all night.
And it's here that it is revealed that the AI that is with his suit is named Karen, or he names her Karen.
Now, something interesting about this, Zach, is Karen is voiced by Jennifer Connelly. Do you know who she's married to?
I do. She is married to Paul Bettany, who plays the Vision / was the voice of Jarvis.
Yeah, so this is a really cool kind of tie-in Easter egg, keeping the AIs close together. She also appeared in the 2003 movie Hulk as Betty.
That's right, yeah. So she has a lot of connection to Marvel.
You know, Peter kind of gets trapped in here for a while. We see him do some training with his webs. One thing we do see is his web pits, the webs between his arms. This is something that was in the comics for a long time. He debuted with it, and it kind of went away over time. It didn't do anything, though. I think maybe he could use it for gliding, but it was really not consistent. It was more aesthetic-based.
I miss those, Caleb. Growing up, I had pajamas that were Spider-Man pajamas, and they had the web pits. They were awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the pajamas were cool, but I always thought they were kind of weird in the comics, so I'm glad they're gone. While he's in here, though, he also sees an Ultron head, another Chitauri energy core.
And we also see the Yellow Jacket that he is wearing on all those cool posters you were talking about, where he's like laying down on a truck and with the New York City in the background, and he has the yellow and red. And I think visually it's very pleasing. I mean, it's just great,
striking.
Yes, it really is. And so he's finally able to break out when it opens to deliver. Or does he do the combo code?
I thought it was to deliver in my memory, but I think he actually figures out the code.
And so Peter Parker finally breaks out of the facility and makes his way all the way back to Washington, D.C. And during this, Midtown wins without him. I was kind of astonished that they just breezed through that, as I thought it was going to try to build up some suspense that is he going to get back in time? But they kind of breezed through the fact that Midtown wins the decathlon and is on their merry way.
Yeah, the only reason this whole subplot is in the film is to get Spider-Man in an environment we haven't seen him before, and I guess they decided that DC was that place, which I feel like is kind of, it's not great. This almost feels like an afterthought. The scenes that Spider-Man are great, but anything with the students, aside from the Washington Monument, because Spider-Man's there, just seems like a wasted opportunity.
And again, this was part of that laundry list. They wanted to present opportunities where Spider-Man hadn't been. So they go to the Staten Ferry. He is in Washington, D.C. Caleb, I am just waiting on Spider-Man Homecoming 2, where he is in the video game Spider-Man 2, and we get to go to the Statue of Liberty and fight
Mysterio, I think.
Yes, it is Mysterio, yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great game. I want to go play that again.
Hey, new one coming out. There was just a big thing about it this week.
That's right. It's coming out in September or October on the PS4.
But he does make it back to the Washington Monument, and the elevator is having issues. It's breaking and falling, and he's trying to get in. And this helicopter comes out of nowhere. It's got like this massive gun on it. Why would you call a helicopter like this when an elevator is breaking?
It was called because of Spider-Man. So, I mean, originally the elevator broke because of the crystal he had in his backpack or pocket that came from the gun that emitted that light all over. So I'm assuming they were thinking some threat, and so they scrambled all military presence in the area, and then Spider-Man happened to appear, and they didn't know who he was. He's an enhanced, and so they have to take him down.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think about it that way. But we do see a spider drone here, which has appeared in the comics. A couple different iterations, I believe. And also a reference to the first movie.
That's right. So Spider-Man comes in and saves all the students, and then as Peter is looking at Liz, Karen says, "It's your time, Peter. Kiss her," which is a callback again from Spider-Man 1 where he kisses Mary J. Watson upside down. Because at this point, he's hanging as well, so it's kind of an obscure call.
But ultimately, he does save the students, and they do make it back home all right. And we get a couple scenes here that aren't too consequential to the plot, but Peter decides he's going to try to find out the identity of these arms dealers, because he's kind of got a cold case at this point, and that leads him to discover who Aaron Davis is, and he tracks him down in a parking lot. Yeah,
we see Aaron Davis here in a parking lot, and Peter Parker tries to interrogate him without success. But Caleb, Aaron Davis is in the comics, and he has a huge connection to another Spider-Man.
That's right. So this guy first appeared in Ultimate Comics Spider-Man #1. That's Volume 2. And he is the enemy, the Prowler. This guy is named Hobie in the regular Marvel Universe, but here it's Aaron Davis. He is the uncle of Miles Morales, I think we mentioned earlier, who is that other Spider-Man in the comics. And so he plays a really, really big role. Here he's kind of just used, I think, for world building. He mentions his nephew. There's actually a deleted scene where he calls his nephew and is talking to him and calls him out by name, Miles.
That's right.
So this is pretty cool. He does get the information from him that he needs. And a funny little tidbit is that Peter mentions his webs dissolve in 2 hours. That's something that's always in the comics. Everybody's wondering, like, what happens to all the webs that he fires? They dissolve. The amount of time they take to dissolve changes depending on what you're watching, but they always do dissolve.
That's right.
And so, with the location in mind, he heads off to the Staten Island Ferry, where he runs into some of these same villains, and he jumps down and gets into a little scuffle. But there's a new character here, Zach. Mac Gargan.
Yes, if you noticed, Mac Gargan, he's one of the thugs, has a scorpion on the side of his neck. That is a call out to the comics.
Because he is the Scorpion from the comics. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 19, this was a guy that was originally hired by J. Jonah Jameson to do some investigating work on Spider-Man that didn't really pan out. Ultimately, Jonah also hires him to undergo an experiment so he can beat Spider-Man. They choose the Scorpion because scorpions are natural predators of spiders. The serum works, but it also drives him mad and insane, and he turns to a life of crime with these new kind of powers and also this new suit. Later, he also becomes Venom.
Yeah, so here we get Spider-Man taking down the thugs, the FBI shows up, as well as the Vulture, who is able to save himself, as well as the Shocker, and escape the ferry while blasting it in half, as well as knocking Gargan into the water and kind of underneath the propellers and all that fun jazz.
Yeah, I actually thought they killed him. They didn't, which we'll see later. But the boat does start splitting apart thanks to that gun. And Peter jumps around, tries to save it. It looks like he's going to until it starts breaking apart.
And we get a recreation of Spider-Man 2, actually. So for me, it felt like, when Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire, is trying to hold the train from stopping after battling Dr. Octopus. This is kind of the same shot as well.
Yeah, it is. It's exactly the same thing. And that's what it looked like in the trailer as well. This was kind of heavily marketed. And in the trailer, I hated this because Spider-Man is strong. He's not strong enough to hold this together. And I had issues with the fact that he was doing it. In the movie, it totally works because he's actually not holding it together.
No, he's not.
It's still falling apart. And Iron Man has to come in to save the day.
But it works really well. Spider-Man needs some guidance, needs to kind of know his abilities. And so Iron Man here gives him a talking to. And what I like about this is that Tony is actually in the suit this time.
That's right. In the earlier scenes, he was just kind of calling in, remoting the suit. But here he actually showed up. It's called out that he called the FBI people. Peter told him about them, about the villains. And he didn't think Tony was doing anything about it, but he did. And so Tony gets upset with him. And, there's a line where Peter says, "I'm nothing without the suit." And Tony says,
"If you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it." Or at least something to that effect, which is a huge call out to Iron Man 3, because that was kind of the whole premise of Iron Man 3 is Tony Stark anything with his suit. And so Tony's learned the lesson, and he's trying to make sure that Peter Parker has learned the same lesson he just went through.
Yeah, and he actually has a small line that says he's acting just like his dad, which is a huge thing for him. If you know his history with his dad, he doesn't like his dad at all, or at least didn't. And so this is kind of him trying to be that father figure to Peter. And so he takes away his suit.
And so Peter returns home to a distraught May who says she has been looking for him and called police departments and hospitals and hasn't been able to find him. And it's here that we get a hint at Uncle Ben's fate.
Yeah, they kind of allude to what happened to him. It's alluded to a little bit throughout this entire film. Not specifically called out because they don't have to.
That's right.
So Peter heads back to Midtown, where he winds up in the principal's office for skipping the decathlon on a school field trip. And if you think this guy looks familiar, it's because he does. This is Principal Morita, played by Kenneth Choi. He looks familiar because Kenneth Choi also played Jim Morita in the first Avenger, the first Captain America movie. He was one of the Howling Commandos, and this principal is that character's grandson.
Yep. In the office, if you look behind him, you can see a picture of him as that actor in Avengers, as well as the Howling Commandos.
Right, which could explain why he's got that affinity for Captain America and those videos.
And so Peter Parker, with the Spider-Man buzz happening around school, decides to get the courage to ask Liz to homecoming.
And she says yes.
And so Peter Parker arrives at Liz's house, being dropped off by Aunt May as usual. And here is the biggest twist in the movie, as well as I think one of the biggest twists in the MCU.
Not quite as big as the Mandarin, but close. Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, is her dad.
A good twist, Caleb. A good twist. I would say this is definitely on par with Bucky killing Tony's parents.
Yes, except we kind of knew about that. But this, I was trying to think back if I knew this or not, because I felt like I knew there was going to be some connection, but I think I'm making that up. I'm pretty sure this caught me way off guard.
I remember watching this in the theater, and it definitely caught me off guard. I love it because it takes this movie and then instantly flips it on its head. You think you know what's going to happen, and then you don't.
Yeah, and it's a very tense and funny scene where Peter can't even look at the camera for pictures.
No, he can't. And so Toomes here figures out who Peter Parker is, and after dropping Liz off, basically threatens him and then lets him go because he did save Liz in Washington, D.C. And that is his one, basically a life for a life.
Right. And I really like that scene because it's tense, it's smartly written, and this is a smart villain, right? He figures out who Peter is because of these things that his daughter's saying. But since Peter does go off inside, he goes in, he's supposed to show Liz a good time. He doesn't. Not too good of a time, though. He does leave, and the Shocker's waiting outside for him in case he does leave. And they get into a fight. And ultimately, Ned comes in and saves the day to allow Peter to go off and find the Vulture.
Now, Caleb, what did you think of the Shocker as a side villain? Because we briefly got one of them. He died, briefly got a second one, and he just got pretty easily defeated here in about a minute or so.
I think this is great. So in the comics, the Shocker is kind of a joke, right? He's the guy that you call and is always defeated. He's always thinking he's got a great plan, and it's a terrible plan, right? So I love the fact that he's so easily defeated here, and also that they don't kill him as well.
Which means he could come back, potentially, for a sequel.
Yeah, we'll talk about it at the end, but I think they might be saving him for something.
But what we do get is Spider-Man suiting up in the original spider suit that he had, which is also a call-out to the comics.
That's right. So in the comics, Spider-Man got a clone for a while. Actually, he has a lot of clones, but Ben Reilly is the one I'm talking about, the Scarlet Spider. In the comics, he wears this red suit with a blue hoodie over it. And it's kind of the exact inverse of this original Spider-Man suit, where the hoodie is red and the rest of him is blue.
And so after helping Peter Parker out, Ned hops on the computer with that foreshadowing of being Spider-Man's guy.
In the chair.
Yeah, in the chair. And he is able to track down the Vulture as Peter Parker drives for one of the first times in a car because he's in high school and he's a freshman or sophomore.
He's a sophomore.
Right. So he doesn't have his license yet, and he drives to the base.
And so he has a pretty tense standoff again here with Toomes. Toomes ends up bringing the entire building down on Peter, and he's trapped under all this rubble. And Zach, this is a very sad scene. This is the way he's crying out almost made me cry the first time I saw this.
Yeah, the way he is whimpering almost, right? And then he tries to lift himself up and he just can't. And you feel the weight of all those rocks. Like, it's a pretty emotional scene.
Yeah, it's very emotional. And in the middle of this, we do get kind of a famous shot of Peter's face superimposed on top of Spider-Man's face. In the comics, they do this all the time. It's like a side-by-side thing. I really didn't like this shot in this movie. It looked really bad to me. Do you have any thoughts on it?
My only thought was it looked a little off because it was his homemade mask, not like the actual Spider-Man mask. But I still thought it worked. I liked it.
Okay. But this whole thing is actually a reference to the Amazing Spider-Man number 33. On the cover of that, as well as the contents, where he is trapped under all this rubble. And for the first 5 or 6 pages, he's just trying to convince himself that he can lift it. And he ultimately does.
That's right. He does in the comics as well as in the movie. And this is actually a scene that Kevin Feige has stated he always wanted to see in a Spider-Man movie. And so he kind of made him include it in Spider-Man Homecoming. The writer said that he said, include this, and so they just wrote it in.
And Zach, I think this is where Peter really becomes a hero. Because really in his career up until this point, he's just having fun, right? He goes out and he swings and helps people because he just want to have fun. He went to help Tony fight Cap because it was fun. It's Tony. But here, I feel this is really where he puts others in front of himself and fights not for himself, but for others, and is kind of stepping into that role of being the traditional Spider-Man that we know and love.
And I would agree with you. It's here that he has finally taken on that hero mantle. And so we jump back to Happy, who's at the Avengers Tower, moving the last shipment of all the assets to upstate New York,
where he sends an airplane off, which apparently has no pilot. It's autopilot. And this is kind of a recurring thing that they've been talking about through the movie, is the Tinker has been asking Toomes, oh, do you want to use the high altitude seal? And he keeps saying no. He finally says yes. We find out it's to rob this thing. They need to get on it. They need to steal some tech. And that's what he tries to do. There is some Easter eggs once he gets in here. We see the Mark 42 from Iron Man 3 in the background at one point. Before they even get on there, Happy Hogan calls out Thor's magic belts. I can't pronounce it.
No, just like Happy, we both will not try to pronounce that.
But this whole thing leads to a battle on top of the airplane.
That's right, a battle which they both kind of lose. Nobody really wins because the airplane ends up crashing with both the Vulture and Peter going down and landing on Coney Island, another iconic piece of land that we haven't seen Spider-Man on.
Typical Parker luck, which is a line from the comics. So they have another showdown here. There's a lot of fighting, but ultimately Toomes, well, Peter loses actually. Toomes is flying off, but his suit's damaged, and so Peter's trying to save him because it's going to blow up. And Toomes doesn't listen, and so it blows up, and that's kind of how Peter wins. So he only wins by accident.
That's right. So, I mean, it still shows that while, yes, Spider-Man has a lot of powers and abilities, he could still use a lot of training. He isn't mature like some of those other superheroes that we have seen in the MCU.
Yeah, but Peter goes over and he does pick up Toomes, who's not dead, and he saves him. And I love this because this is Spider-Man in the comics, right? He doesn't kill. That's not his thing. He saves people. And aside from Zemo in Civil War, this is the first film that a hero has gone out of his way to save the villain. And I feel that the only reason that happened in Civil War was because the Black Panther was like, no, you know what? You're going to get the justice you deserve.
Yeah, but I would definitely agree with you there. But I think it works with who the Vulture is, and it works with the development of his character. This was a great villain, I thought. One of the best MCU villains to date.
Yeah, his motivations were clear. He was acted very, very well. And great conclusion, I think, as well.
Visiting Midtown High one more time, we learn that Liz is now leaving to Oregon as her family can't really stay. Well, they could stay, but they don't really want to stay and watch her father get prosecuted.
That's right. We also get a reveal here out of left field while they're in a decathlon meeting. Michelle says, oh yeah, my friends call me MJ.
Yes, this had a ton of people outraged because MJ is a tall redhead that is very popular in the comics and isn't like this character, Michelle, who's a little odd, who's super intelligent, and just different from her usual characterization.
Yeah, now it's been stated that this was just kind of like a nod to their relationship in the comics, that this is not their version of MJ, Mary Jane Watson. I hope that's true, because I don't like her as MJ.
Yeah, that's correct. I like her character, but I don't think she's a good representation, or she should be a representation of MJ, because I believe that character should still be comic book accurate. But Caleb, you're right. Kevin Feige said this isn't MJ from the comics. This is just a call out to her. So that has been confirmed officially.
And so now that Peter has finished up at school and beat the villain, he is whisked off away with Happy to the new Avengers facility upstate, so that Tony can invite him to join the Avengers officially.
So we see a new suit that Tony offers Peter, the Iron Spider.
Yeah, Zach, how do you feel about this suit?
You know, I remember when Spider-Man came out, you had a lot of gripes because you did not think that this suit looked good. I was fine with it. I mean, this varies a lot from the comic book version. Caleb, what's the comic book version?
So in the comics, Peter gets the Iron Spider suit from Tony during the Civil War storyline, and it's sort of this entirely red metallic suit with a gold accent. So there's a giant gold spider on it, his eyes are gold, and then he also has these 4 legs that come out of the back.
So I was very disappointed that this was the Iron Spider suit. Basically, that confirms we'll never see that suit in the MCU, which very saddens me because that is my favorite Spider-Man suit. But what did you think of it?
Well, you know, it's funny you say that because this actually wasn't confirmed as the Iron Spider suit until like a month or two ago, actually, in some stuff for Infinity War. The reason I dislike this suit so much is not the suit design. It just was terrible CGI. It looked like they threw it in last minute, which they probably did, and I just hated the way it looked. I watched this movie on a Blu-ray, I rented it, and it looked better than I remember. I don't know if they fixed it, but it still doesn't look perfect. In fact, even in the promotional material for Infinity War, I was not convinced I liked the suit until I saw the trailer, and it looks much better in the trailers than it does in anything that's like a still or a poster.
And so Peter does not accept the suit, and Caleb, I think this shows that he has grown. You know, he knows who he is. He knows that he needs to be grounded as a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, at least for the time being, to grow his powers and learn who he is.
And not only that, but he's faced off against his first major villain, and like we said, he actually lost. And I don't think he wants to be responsible for being in the big leagues with the Avengers and going up against these kinds of villains.
And so as Tony Stark says that was his plan all along, we find out that that was not his plan all along. We see Pepper Potts here, which now confirms that they are back together after splitting in Civil War and are now potentially going to be engaged/married for Infinity War.
Yeah, I think so.
As an interesting side note, Caleb, in the beginning of this movie, we saw a shirt that Peter Parker was wearing that is actually the same shirt, same design that Pepper Potts was wearing in Iron Man 3. So I don't know if she just loaned it to him, or it's kind of weird.
That is kind of weird.
So it's assumed that Tony proposes to Pepper on stage, and I guess we'll have to see an Infinity War after she dies.
Oh.
Which is our Caleb and I's bet. And so we go back to the apartment.
Yeah, and Peter walks in and finds a bag with his suit in it that Tony gave him. Tony gives him the suit back because he's ready for it now. And he puts it on and...
What the
Yeah, Aunt May finds him. Zach, what do you think of this?
It got a ton of laughs from me as Aunt May basically drops an explicit. But Caleb, I loved it. And apparently this was Kevin Feige's idea. Kevin Feige has stated that he wanted Aunt May to find out who Peter was in the Spider-Man movies, and so this fit. Your thoughts?
I don't have an issue with the moment, and I think the moment's pretty funny. I am disappointed that she knows, because the secret identity of Peter is such a big part in the comics, and it creates so much tension, right? Like, there's been moments where he's walking with Aunt May, he has to run off and change because a villain's going in to fight, right? And she continues walking completely oblivious to it. And he's up in the sky fighting. And he's trying to make sure she doesn't find out who he is. And it's this back and forth thing. And that's really fun. And that's really dynamic. And none of the other characters really have secret identities. And so I was disappointed with this because I like that dynamic.
And that ends the movie.
Until our end credit scenes.
That's right. So the first one we get is we see that Toombs is in the jail, still alive, as well as Gargan.
That's right. Matt Gargan walks up to him and is like, "Hey, I heard you know who Peter..." well, not Peter. "Hey, I heard you know who Spider-Man is."
That's right.
And Toombs refuses to sell Peter out. Not to help Peter, I don't think, but for his own personal gain.
I agree with you there.
Now, Zach, I also think that this might be setting up a version of the Sinister Six, because Matt Gargan comes up and he's like, "Hey, I've got some friends that would really like to know." And we've gotten, like, half of the Sinister Six in this film already. Shocker has been on the team, Vulture has been on the team, the Scorpion has been on the team, and that's 3 out of 6. There's been multiple different versions of the Sinister Six in the comics. So I think that this could be setting it up, and if it is, this was way better than anything that they tried to do in Amazing Spider-Man 2 in regards to that.
And Caleb, I would have to agree with you there. I do believe it is setting up for Sinister Six. I've seen a couple articles indicating that the idea is to set it up for Spider-Man 3. Obviously, this has not been confirmed anywhere on any Marvel site. This is just all speculation, but it would make a lot of sense. I do know that Wilson Fisk, or the actor who plays Wilson Fisk in the Daredevil TV show. I can't remember the actor off the top of my head.
Vincent D'Onofrio.
But he has expressed interest in regards to playing Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, in Spider-Man.
I would love for that to happen. I don't think it's ever going to, but Kingpin is a great Spider-Man villain. It would be great.
And the final end credit scene rewards patience with a pretty funny scene, not giving any more details. So we get another final Captain America short video. He actually filmed more of them, which you can watch on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Basically saying, "All right, well, you waited here. Good for you." But that brings our movie to a close. So, Zach, with the movie coming out, and we think it did pretty well, what did the general audience think about it?
Yeah, so Spider-Man Homecoming was released on July 7th of 2017, and as I mentioned before, it had a lower budget of $175 million, and its worldwide gross was $880 million. So it was able to basically get a 500% return in total, which is basically up there with some of the big ones. So it's not as high as Marvel's Avengers or Iron Man 3. However, it is now the third highest grossing Marvel movie, unless I think Black Panther might have beaten it by now. I haven't seen the updated numbers yet, but
Black Panther broke $1 billion. So
okay, so Black Panther has definitely beat it as well. But Spider-Man did very, very well for making its money back. It's also done fairly well with its ratings. So Rotten Tomato gave it a 92%. On Metacritic, it has a 73, which are both fairly high scores. As far as awards go, it was nominated from a few here or there. Actually wasn't nominated for a lot of awards, which isn't, a huge surprise. It's a good movie, but it's not one of those movies that would win a lot of awards. The only awards it did win came from the Kids' Choice as well as Teen Choice Awards, which were obviously both for Tom Holland as well as Zendaya.
And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a good swing, but it's not a swing in that type of direction. But aside from that, Zach, what kind of legacy do you think this leaves behind?
Caleb, the legacy this leaves behind, I think, right now isn't very apparent, but I think could be extremely apparent in the future. What I mean by that is this is definitely setting up the fact that there will be a Sinister Six, that these future Spider-Man movies will also feature another big-time hero. I mean, if you think about the movies that we've gotten, excluding Black Panther, since that was kind of a niche movie, Thor Ragnarok had another Marvel character. I think from now on, you can't really do a solo Marvel movie without having another huge superhero in it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I don't think that this movie has a whole lot to leave behind either right now. I think that even beyond his series, he's probably going to come into his own a lot in the greater scheme of the MCU as we go forward, especially past Infinity War. But I think it did kind of introduce us to more ground level heroes. We had Ant-Man that kind of did that, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a hero yet. He was really just a thief in that film. And so it's nice to see the ground level, the Marvel Universe, see how they interact with these massive events that are coming around them, things like that. And of course, it filled out the massive Spider-Man cast here, which is just enormous with all kinds of comic characters, as well as the Tony Peter relationship.
And Caleb, we've mentioned this briefly in some of the other podcasts, but I do believe that Tony is phasing out. Robert Downey Jr. is going to be done with his role, and Spider-Man's going to kind of take that front runner. We already have heard that Chris Evans is backing out after Avengers 4, and so with some of these head characters probably going to be killed off in Infinity War, Avengers 4, or at least leaving, they need to be replaced with other high-octane characters, one of those being Spider-Man.
Yeah, and I've heard that before, and I think that's a good idea. I'm a little bit worried about it, seeing as Sony can pull the plug at any moment. And also, if they're going to do that, they're going to have to do bigger stories, right? I like the fact that this story is fairly small, but if he's going to be your front runner, you have to do bigger stuff. And he's got tons of big stories in the comics, as well as small ones. There's a story a few years ago called Ends of the Earth, which was a massive comic book story. I don't know if you can do something that big in the movies, but try to adapt some of those larger stories.
Exactly.
All right, Zach. Well, having seen and discussed the movie, where does it lie in your rankings of all the MCU movies?
With our Spider-Man special, I get to go first. Well, Caleb, I really enjoyed this movie. It was an enjoyable movie, fantastic villain, definitely up there. The humor was phenomenal. I've seen, obviously, all the other Spider-Man movies, and so going into this, I was really excited to see how they would introduce him into the MCU, and Marvel did a fantastic job. And so where Spider-Man lands is where I look at my list, I have Iron Man as number 5, and that's kind of, I first start there. Is it better than Iron Man or worse? This is a hard one, but I would say Spider-Man for sure is better than Iron Man. Right above that is Guardians of the Galaxy and then the Avengers, and I don't think it hits those highs. And so Spider-Man Homecoming is in my number 5 in the 5th spot, meaning my new list from 1 to 16. 16 movies, that's right, is this. Captain America Civil War at 1, Captain America Winter Soldier is 2, The Avengers at 3, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 is 4, and Spider-Man Homecoming rounding out my top 5 is number 5. Following Iron Man at number 6, Ant-Man at number 7, Captain America at 8, Doctor Strange at 9, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 at 10, Avengers Age of Ultron at 11, Thor 2 at 12, Thor at 13, Iron Man 2 at 14, Incredible Hulk at 15, and Iron Man 3 at 16. Caleb, I'm really interested to see as a Spider-Man nerd, where does this fall in your list?
Well, Zach, I think your ranking is very interesting. For me, I think that this is a great villain. I think that this might be Marvel's best villain. We know his motivations, we know what he's about, we know his family. Nothing that we've gotten in any other movie comes close to that. And so I think he's really great. I think this movie as a whole is a great manual on how to take source material and translate it into a film. It does bug me a little bit that every single kid at Peter's high school is a character, that they're not actually that person. That's weird. I don't know why they had to do that. But I love seeing Spider-Man come to life here. I think the pacing could be a bit better. I think there's scenes that don't do a whole lot. This movie does jump around a lot, and there's some that feel like it could have been better written. Like the party, I don't think the party is necessary. Some of the shots of Toomes' base, I don't know if it's quite necessary or could have been done differently. But that's not a big deal. I do think it's very smart, though, that they took this and built it off of the other movies, right? This movie would not exist if the Avengers didn't, because the entire plot of this movie revolves around the fallout of that film. Peter has grown up seeing the Avengers as they were doing these things. And so he's a kid who knows that sort of world, and he's ready to go out there and help people. And I think that's really great. But, you know, as I said before, let's go bigger next time, right? I like this smaller story, but it could be more interesting. So for my rankings, similarly to you, Zach, I feel like this is a fairly good Marvel movie. It's pretty good. It's not the best, definitely not the worst. And so when I look at my list, you know, I've got the Captain Americas and the Guardians towards the top of mine, and then Avengers, and then Iron Man. I think it's better than Iron Man. I think it's more enjoyable than Iron Man. But I don't think that it's as good as the Avengers. Just because the Avengers had a lot of fun, it was very action-packed, it flowed really well, lots of character interactions. And so for me, I'm going to sandwich it between those two, and for me, that's my number 6 spot. Big Spider-Man fan, but being objective about it, it's not the best one. My rankings, from number 1 all the way down to 16, is Captain America the Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, The Avengers, Spider-Man Homecoming at number 6, the original Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Thor, Avengers Age of Ultron, Thor the Dark World, Captain America the First Avenger, Ant-Man, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 3, and Iron Man 2.
Alright, so number 5 and number 6 in our lists, respectively.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good indication of where this is in the grand scheme of things. Well, Zach, while Spider-Man is kind of higher middle of the road, do you know who's at the top of the road?
Does he lay eggs and spit venom and control an army of spiders?
Only on Thursdays.
Classic Taylor.
Taylor Poole. So Taylor Poole did our opening music for the show. He does great work, guys. He's a really good guy. We really want you to check him out. His website is taylorpoolemusic.com. That's TAYLORPOOLE music.com.
When you're not rocking out to Spider-Man music with Taylor, you can go check out CNC Power Hour over at Twitch. They stream Magic the Gathering as well as video games. You know them by now, CNC Power Hour.
We also would like you to check out our new website, causewe'renerds.com. You can find all the places where you can find our podcast to listen to, including Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. That's causewe'renerds.com, CUZWERENERDS.com.
That's right, send all your hot ants our way.
Thanks for listening to 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Spider-Man Homecoming. We would love to hear your comments and feedback at causewe'renerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. Or leave us a review on iTunes or Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or any other major podcasting or social sites. Join us next week as we discuss Thor Ragnarok. Why did Marvel choose to make such a massive change to Thor? What's Hope doing here, and why does it matter? And what does this film mean for the future of the MCU? Find out these answers and much more on 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Thor Ragnarok. Stay nerdy.
And so we... Butts and sews. That's what I like. I like to
Sewing butts.
Sewing butts. No.
Zach, I'm going to glue your butt cheeks together. Do you remember that? Your brothers would always say that.
So they actually tried to do it once. They held me down, pulled down my pants, and were about to super glue them together, but luckily my mom intervened. Gosha family time!
I'm Caleb, and I endorse this message.